Thank you for having me. I wanted to first thank Community Access for bringing about this wonderful day of conversation about youth mental health. Particularly Steve Coe and John Williams. They've been great supporters of mine, and I am a huge fan of theirs. And it is, the time is now to start talking about youth mental health in perhaps a way that the world hasn't been before. I want to first tell you a little bit about myself. As I mentioned earlier in a Q&A, I am actually a parent. I'm a parent, and I'm a Mac, so I don't know how to use this thing. So I'm a parent. I raised 3 boys, and my middle son struggled immensely as a very young child. And by the time he was 9 years old, he was suicidal. Now, I didn't know as a young parent this statistic. I didn't know that 1 in 5 children struggle from a mental health disorder. In fact, I would say what I knew was that a child's behavior is the result of parenting. And that's the world we all live in. That a young child's behavior, unless you are in the world of mental health, you do not know that a child's behavior can possibly be symptoms of an emerging mental health condition. And so my son struggled for many, many years. And we struggled as a family for many years before we were able to really get him the help he needed. What I know now is that his behaviors were emerging severe anxiety and bipolar disorder. But it took 7 years from the onset of what I now know are symptoms until the point where he got an actual diagnosis that was meaningful and helpful. But during those early years, we struggled to try to figure out what was going on. Like Victor said earlier from the Jed Foundation, I don't like to use the term stigma. I learned all about mental health and mental illness and stigma and what that meant. But I felt that it was really important to try to really define what that was in order to really understand how to combat it. So we've come up with a more specific approach to understanding what families go through. It's blame, shame, misunderstanding, and silence. And it is a vicious cycle among parents. As was mentioned in my introduction, I wrote and produced a feature-length film that I'm proud to say was actually premiered at the New York City Mental Health Film Festival 2 years ago, called No Letting Go. And that film is based on our own story. What I have found, both from the reaction that we've gotten from the film and from my own research and the development of a parent support group, which I founded 7 years ago, there are so many parents just like me. And we live in a world where we are blamed, or we feel, or we blame ourselves. A young child shouldn't have a mental illness unless we're doing something wrong. A young child, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old who's acting out, why can't the parents control that child? That blame and shame leads to delays in treatment, complete isolation. Our family isolated for years. We lacked the fundamental knowledge. We knew, as in raising children, the importance of teaching them to wash their hands, taking vitamins, eating right, exercise. Those things were all the things that we all talked about. And on the playground and on the soccer fields, we could ask our other friends and parents, where do we go? My child is struggling with allergies. Perhaps my child has asthma. But mental health is simply not playground conversation. It just isn't. So see, I'm terrible at this. I'm so sorry. There you go. I got it. I'm good at it now. Anyway, sorry. I got to a point in my life where I decided we had to change the narrative. If we want to do something about youth mental health and improve the outcomes, we need to completely change the way our society sees mental health and mental health conditions. And it's very difficult. But it's something that we at the Youth Mental Health Project strongly believe in. There you go, I did it. At the Youth Mental Health Project, let me back up and tell you that I wrote and produced this film, I started a support group, and I began speaking out locally. And while I think the film does a great job of telling the story, the common story of what parents go through when they struggle, it's wonderful to watch a movie, but we need broader conversations. And I knew that something more needed to be done. So I did quite a bit of research on all of the existing mental health organizations in the United States, and there are some great ones: JED, MHA, NAMI, Community Access, which gives vital support to young people and adults in terms of housing. But I had a very difficult time finding a national organization that focused exclusively on youth. And I met a wonderful woman, Wendy Ward, who is now the executive director of the Youth Mental Health Project. And her background is that, from her background of having two daughters who suffered trauma, she became very involved in understanding social and emotional learning, and how do we teach children and how do we teach teachers more about social and emotional learning. I, at that point, was on the road talking to people about mental illness, and she was trying to provide foundation for mental health, and we thought, we need to do this together. We shouldn't be exclusively focusing on illness or exclusively focusing on social emotional learning and emotional intelligence. We need to change the narrative so that we're looking at the entire continuum. So our approach is a whole community approach. I would like to suggest to you that engaging with parents, young parents particularly, as early as possible is essential if we want to change outcomes. We also need to engage more thoroughly with educators, and not just at the college level or high school level, but very, very early on. That's what we call mental health literacy. We need to understand the entire continuum of mental health, which I'll go into a little bit later. Empowering parents, empowering teachers, letting them know this is common and it's okay and it's nobody's fault, will go so far into changing outcomes. I would like to suggest, although I do believe, as Victor said earlier, that things have changed because of all these great celebrities coming out and talking about it, and young adults and teenagers are more open than ever to discussing mental health conditions. I'd like to submit to you that that is not the case in our younger population. We also very much believe in the power of peer support. There's a lot of evidence, a lot of research been done about the importance of peer support. But sometimes what's forgotten is the peer-to-peer, parent-to-parent support. And I've seen the success of that in my own community with the support group that I started. In the past 7 years, we have had over 1,000 parents in Westchester County alone attend our support group. And the results, I can honestly say, have been incredible. And there are young parents whose children at 7, 8, 9 years old are starting to struggle and behave in ways that don't make sense, all the way up to young adults who are in their mid-20s. So we have taken the film No Letting Go and brought it into communities for local community screenings. And that's been a great success. We go into communities, we screen the film, and we use it as a springboard for conversation. I'm proud to say that the film has won quite a few awards and is starting to be recognized even more so among the mental health community. But we also feel very important about getting into communities in any other way possible, through workshops, through community events, and speaking at conferences. We've developed educational programming and educational material for a variety of audiences to be able to get to a place where we can change the narrative about children's mental health and understand that any child can have a mental health condition, that mental health is as important as physical health, and that young parents need to learn about mental health in the same way that they learn about physical health. It should be okay to have playground conversations about the development of our young children's mental health. So people originally said, well, why do you want to talk about youth? I think everyone in this room and hopefully people watching understand why it's important to talk about youth. At the Youth Mental Health Project, we define youth as 0 to 24. Babies are born with mental health, every single one of them. And it's time that we acknowledge that and spread that awareness among even at the earliest and youngest stages possible. We know all of this stuff. I'm going to go through facts we know. Mental health conditions are the most common. 1 in 5, we've heard these statistics. It's actually it's closer to 18 million children. What's not often talked about is the fact that 50% of all cases of mental health diagnoses and conditions begin before the age of 14 years old. I would submit to you that if we're waiting until high school, we're waiting too long. 75% before the age of 24. And I hate to contradict the JED Foundation, but a recent study has actually come out that it's suicide is the second leading cause of death beginning at age 10. 10 years old. We can do better by talking more openly and honestly and making people more comfortable about the entire spectrum and continuum of mental health. We know the impact on schools, and we need to get into schools. I don't need to go through these statistics. I think everybody knows that a child's mental health if a child's mental health is failing, there's a huge impact on schools. So we do believe in mental health literacy for all, but our particular focus is on educators, young educators, not just high school. Let's teach social emotional learning very young. Let's teach about the entire continuum of mental health. And we have created workshops and educational events and materials that speak to educators and parents and mental health professionals as well. We've actually done a lot of work with mental health professionals to help them understand, as we were talking about earlier, how to engage with parents in a way that parents can hear them and in a way that's actually helpful. And how can parents learn how to be empowered by knowledge and strength? So one of the things that we teach, and this is just a very quick summary because I have like 3 minutes left, this is a little blurb of one of our workshops on how we try to teach this new narrative, which is understanding. People talk about mental illness. They think mental health is something different than mental illness. I am guilty of this. As someone before all of this happened in my life, I didn't know. I thought mental illness couldn't happen in my neighborhood or with my family. And if someone talked about their mental health, my mind went right to mental illness. And that was something different. But what we know now, and those of us in the room, I hope it know, and I hope those watching at home, is that mental health is an overall condition just like physical health. There's mental wellness, and I feel like something happened to my slide here. There's mental wellness, which is being able to perform in life successfully. And then there's mental illness, which doesn't seem to, well, it kind of fell off. But anyway, mental illness we define by how a person is functioning. This may seem pretty simple to the psychologists and psychiatrists in the room and those of you who are mental health professionals, but this is an important distinction that the general community doesn't understand. That we need to look at the entire continuum of mental health that includes wellness and illness, and recognize, as Victor adequately said from earlier, that it's a whole range and that we all struggle at some point or can struggle. It's just a matter of where on the continuum are we at any given moment in time. These same philosophies hold true with children. So my son at 7 years old could not go to school, could barely leave the house. While I was told that I had a problem and needed to seek help, he languished and increased in his anxiety. And what I see now is he couldn't function. And mental illness is about functioning. My son is now 21 years old. He's doing very well. He's independent, living on his own and working. Very, very proud of him. We were the lucky ones. We got him help very early, and although it was painful and difficult, he is a good example of how early intervention can make a huge difference. But I still believe we could have gotten to him earlier if we had understood the basic premise of what mental health was, and that his behaviors and inability to cope and inability to function at school and with friends was a sign that he needed mental health help. He still has bipolar disorder. He has a mental health diagnosis. He does not have a mental illness because he's functioning. But he does have a diagnosis. If someone had diabetes and they were managing their diabetes, we would not say they were ill. We would say they manage their diabetes. It's a physical health condition they're managing. My son and many, many others like him don't live with a mental illness unless they're ill. There have been times my son had a mental illness. Now he has a mental health diagnosis and a condition that he manages, and we need to learn to see those people as well and not always as ill. So that's what I have to say. I could go on and on. It's very hard to squeeze all of the things that I want to say into 20 minutes, but I hope I got there. Okay. There's a lot more information I have to share. You can check out all of our resources and some more of the things that we do and our philosophies on our website, which is ymhproject.org. And our contact information is there, and I look forward to hearing from you. So with that, I believe it's a Q&A time, correct?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Silverman. So we do have time for unfortunately, for just a few questions. I'll start with one of our questions from online. You're a filmmaker. Can you recommend any Hollywood/mainstream films you think do a good job of portraying mental health issues?
Ooh, I assume you mean besides No Letting Go, which...
Given.
I will say that not to pump up this film is one of the very few that discusses what it's like to have a young child in a house, and it's really a family perspective. It deals with the societal reaction and cultural reaction and the impact on siblings and parents. There are a lot of great films out there, and there's so many. Oh, geez, email me and I'll send you a big list, because there are so many. And I have yes, Julie Ridge is in the audience, and she has a 22-page list of great films. But it is hard. Let's just say it's hard to put an accurate story in an hour and a half. It just is. And ours is an independent film. Hollywood films tend to glorify because they need that excitement. I happen to be a huge fan of Silver Lining Playbook. I thought that was very, very well done. Touched with Fire by Paul Dalio is another one that a lot of people think is great. Well, Infinitely Polar Bear was fantastic. I'm thinking more narrative feature films as opposed to documentaries. Of course, there are a host of fantastic documentaries. Last year at the Mental Health Film Festival, as you know, we screened Mind Game with, and that's a fabulous documentary. But in terms of a regular audience, I think it's good to see feature films because you can relate to a story in a way that some people just can't. I find can't relate it to as with a documentary. Thanks for the question.
No, thank you. Given the prevalence and onset of anxiety-based mental health challenges among adolescents, should curriculum in middle schools be designed or constructed with mental health professionals with the understanding that these children lack executive functioning skills and are in very stressful environments?
Wow, that's a big question. It's a great question. My personal opinion is that we need to adjust our curriculum starting in preschool and kindergarten. Kids are never too young to learn about their emotions and about their feelings. We teach in our society happy, mad, sad, and it's not enough. And so young children who have severe anxiety, like my son, shut down or behave poorly or have fits. I can't tell you how many times I had to leave a grocery store because he couldn't handle the anxiety of that. So, and he was very young. Once I learned more, because as a recovering attorney, I'm all about research, and when I did the research to find out what was going on and really got my head around it, I began to teach my younger son emotional regulation and resilience, and I gave him language. So I think first and foremost, we need to get into elementary schools with teaching language and allowing teachers to have more awareness of what mental health is all about and how it can impact behavior in a classroom. And certainly through middle school, which is a highly anxiety-producing time, absolutely, if we could get professionals involved in developing curriculum. It's difficult, though. There are so many barriers to education, to the school systems. Superintendents, and I actually presented at the National Council for I presented there as well, but I presented that in July at the conference for the National Conference for School Principals this past summer, which were all principals from K through 12. And the younger principals, the principals of younger kids, were the ones desperately seeking more information, which is smart. I think also parents need to be involved in that. We can't just teach educators. If the parents are still living in the cycle of blame, shame, and misunderstanding, they'll remain silent and they will remain confused, and getting help for these children will not happen, especially at the younger years, without the parents' engagement. So that was a really long answer. Sorry about that.
It's a really long question.
Yeah, it's complicated. I dream, though. My dream in this country, and I see they're doing an excellent job in Canada, so I'm really looking forward to hearing the afternoon speaker. They're getting into communities very early. And yes, it's important to get into colleges, so important, and so important in high schools. And I'm not suggesting we don't do that. I'm suggesting if we want to get to early intervention and prevention, we need to start earlier.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Silver.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.